also reveals, quote, a government of Iraq capable of opposing its authority in every province in Iraq. Right now, it can't even impose its authority in Baghdad, and that one statement makes my point. That he continues to cling to the failed strategy of this administration, which is that it's possible to have a Shia-dominated central government strong enough that it in fact controls the whole country and has the overwhelming support and confidence of the Kurds and the Sunnis. I wish that were true, but I don't believe in the lifetime of anyone in this room that will happen. How do we get to the points John wants us to arrive at? How do we get from here to there? John is silent on every one of his aspirations. And I think the reason why, as I said, John is silent, he doesn't have a plan. Actually, he does. It's the same plan that President Bush has and has been pursuing for 5 years. Stay. Stay in Iraq until we build a strong central government that secures the support of the people. Never mind there's no trust within the government, no trust of the government by the people, no capacity on the part of the present government to deliver basic security and services, and little evidence that the government in Baghdad will develop that trust and capacity anytime soon. Stay in Iraq until the very last vestige of Iranian influence is eliminated. Stay in Iraq until the last member of Al-Qaeda is killed. Stay in Iraq indefinitely. In fact, when Senator McCain was asked whether his vision of the war being over in 2013 amounted to a timetable, he responded, quote, "It's not a timetable, it's victory. It's victory, which I've always predicted. I didn't know how or when we were going to win World War II. I just knew we were going to win." Like President Bush, John grounds his argument on a war with no end in his assessment of the dire consequences of what would happen if we began to draw down in Iraq. He argues that Iraq is the meeting point of the two greatest threats to America, Al-Qaeda and Iran. It's an argument laden with irony, as I'm sure has not escaped any of you in here. Who opened the door to Al-Qaeda in Iraq? President Bush. And who would keep the door open? John McCain. Al-Qaeda in Iraq is a Bush-fulfilling prophecy. It wasn't there before the war, and it's there now. Iran's influence in Iraq went from 0 to 60, as we used to say when we were kids. It went from 0 to 60, and it gave the Shia religious parties inspired and nurtured by Iran a path to power. No matter how we got to this point, President Bush and Senator McCain argued if we start to leave, it would further empower Iran and Al-Qaeda in Iraq. I believe they're exactly wrong. And so do a large number of prominent retired military and national security experts of both parties, many of whom recently testified before my Foreign Relations Committee. Would drawing down really strengthen Al-Qaeda in Iraq and give it the launching pad to attack America, which the President asserts, and I assume John believes? Or would it help eliminate what little indigenous Iraqi support for Al-Qaeda in Iraq remains? Al-Qaeda is down to about 2,000 Iraqis and a small number of foreigners who's almost exclusively focused on Iraq. When we draw down, the most likely result, suggested by many and myself as well, is that the Iraqis of all confessions will stamp out the remnants. And we can retain a residual force in or near Iraq to help them finish that job. What about Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Pakistan, the superhighway of terror? If we draw down in Iraq, will they be emboldened in Afghanistan and Pakistan? Or to paraphrase a national intelligence estimate on terrorism, would they lose one of their most effective recruiting tools, the notion that we're in Iraq to stay, with permanent military bases and a desire to control Iraqi oil? And would they finally risk the full measure America might because we'd be able to actually deploy forces to Afghanistan, which is in a perilous circumstance, to deal with al-Qaeda where it lives and where it has free reign. Senator McCain has taken a lot of heat for saying that he wouldn't mind if American troops stay in Iraq for 100 years. In all honesty, I think we Democrats are overstating what he meant by it. It's clear to me, the truth is, he was trying to make an analogy to our long-term presence in a peaceful post-war Germany, a post-armistice Korea, and a post-Dayton Bosnia. But Germany, Korea, and Bosnia, after the peace, are nothing like Iraq today, with thousands of bombs, hundreds of Americans injured, and dozens of Americans killed every month. And there's little prospect that Iraq will look like any of those countries in the near term. Worse, saying you're happy to stay in Iraq for 100 years fuels exactly the kind of dangerous conspiracy theories and the urban legends that populate every Arab country in the world about America's intentions. And they aid the radicals in the recruitment that we should be seeking to dispel these urban legends. That's why I've repeatedly written in the legislation, I think over 5 times, no permanent bases, no American permanent bases in Iraq. And that's why Senator Webb and Casey and I wrote in the emergency budget, now before the Senate, a requirement that Congress approve any long-term security arrangements this administration negotiates with Iraq. They should not be doing that. What about Iran? The idea that we can wipe out every single vestige of Iran's influence in Iraq is a fantasy and belies history. Even with 160,000 troops in Iraq, Prime Minister Maliki, the president's closest ally and our ally, invites Ahmadinejad to Baghdad, greets him warmly with kisses on both cheeks, and talks about how there's a need to cooperate. So much for eliminating all vestiges of Iranian influence in Iraq. Like it or not, Iran is a major regional power. It shares a long border with and a long history with Iraq. Right now, Iran loves the status quo with 140,000 American troops bogged down and bleeding, caught in the crossfire of intra-Shia rivalry and Sunni-Shia war. By drawing down, in my view, we can take away Iran's ability to wage, as the president says, a proxy war against our troops and force Tehran to focus and concentrate on something they want to avoid, and that is outright turmoil inside Iraq's borders and instability beyond them, which will be no gift to them at all. Should we debate the consequences of drawing down? Yes, they are debatable. I think there are overwhelming evidences on the side we're arguing. But, more importantly, we ought to be debating the cost of staying. They really aren't very debatable. The risk of drawing down, as I said, are debatable. The cost of staying with 140,000 troops are knowable, and they get steeper every single day. The continued loss of American life and limbs of our soldiers. We're still losing, with things calmed down, 30 to 40 American deaths a month. We're still spending $3 billion a week. We are still locked down in a way that the strain on our troops and their family, as a consequence of repeated and extended tours, has caused some of our wisest active military leaders to warn of the disintegration, the degradation, I should say, of the United States military. The drain on our treasury is $12 billion, as I said, every month. The impact on readiness of our armed forces, tying down so many troops, as the Army Vice Chief of Staff Richard Cody recently said, we don't have anything left over in terms of combat divisions to deal with emergencies that might arise in other parts of the world. The inability to send enough soldiers to the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, where al-Qaeda, as I said, has regrouped and is plotting new attacks.